When the relationship ends, what you lose first isn't the person, it's the purpose. You wake up the next morning, and the silence is unbearable. There's no crisis to manage, no message to decode, no emotional storm to stabilize. It feels like someone ripped the job description of your life out of your hands. That's what makes the post-breakup crash so disorienting. You weren't just in love, you were employed. You had a role. You were the fixer, the caretaker, the emotional manager. And now that the position no longer exists, your entire sense of value collapses with it. This is the hidden architecture of what psychologists call codependent attachment. It's when your worth is built, not on who you are, but on what you do for someone else. You become valuable only through your function. You don't think, I'm loved because I'm me. You think, I'm loved because I help, because I stay, because I fix. The problem is that when the relationship ends, that function disappears. And without that role, you face a terrifying question that your nervous system isn't equipped to answer. Who am I when I am not needed? That's why breakups can feel less like grief and more like withdrawal. You were addicted not just to the person, but to the sense of usefulness they gave you. Every time you soothed them, calmed them, or fixed something, your brain released a small dose of validation. You felt needed, and that need became your drug. So when the relationship ends, it's not just emotional peanuts, neurological chaos. Your brain is trying to adjust to the absence of purpose, of that constant feedback loop of being someone's emotional anchor. This is why the silence after a breakup feels violent. It's not just quiet, it's the absence of meaning. When you spend months or years being the person who listens, rescues, repairs, and absorbs, your nervous system becomes conditioned to chaos. It thrives on crisis because crisis gives you direction. You always know what to do next. There's always something to fix. When that ends, your body doesn't feel peaceful, it feels empty, and that emptiness is interpreted as danger. The caretaker's identity isn't built in a day. It's formed early, often in environments where love was conditional, where affection was earned through responsibility, where you learned that being helpful was safer than being needy. Maybe you grew up with a parent who was emotionally unstable, and you learned to soothe them before soothing yourself. Maybe you were praised for being the strong one, the mature one, the one who keeps things together. Those small reinforcements create a blueprint. To be loved, I must fix. And every adult relationship becomes an unconscious reenactment of that early survival strategy. So when the breakup happens, you don't just lose the person, you lose your survival pattern. You lose the very structure that kept your emotional world predictable. That's why you find yourself checking your phone for messages even when you know it's over. You're not hoping for reconciliation. You're hoping for assignment. You want to be needed again, because need is the closest thing your body recognizes as love. The irony is that people who live in this caretaker loop often believe the strong ones, the stable, selfless ones, who hold everything together. But the truth is, the caretaker role is often a disguise for deep dependency. It's not selflessness, it's You disappear into other people's problems because your own emptiness feels too unbearable to face. You feel safest when you're fixing because it keeps you from confronting the question that haunts you in the quiet. If I stop fixing, will anyone stay? That's why post-breakup grief for a caretaker doesn't follow the usual pattern of loss. It's not about missing the laughter or the shared memories. It's about missing the emotional labor that gave you structure. You start to crave the chaos again, because chaos is familiar. You might even find yourself seeking out situations or people who need saving just to feel alive again. That's not love, it's repetition. Your body is trying to recreate the conditions under which you used to feel valuable. Here's an example. Imagine a woman named Sarah. Her boyfriend was emotionally volatile, quick to anger, quick to spiral. For years, she learned to anticipate his moods before he spoke. She would calm him down, smooth things over, fix what was broken. It was exhausting, but it gave her purpose. When he finally left, she told her friend she was fine. She even said she was relieved, but within days, the silence began to eat her alive. Her phone didn't light up with crisis anymore. No one needed her. The stillness felt like failure. Within a month, she found herself drawn to someone new, a man who, coincidentally, was also a little chaotic, also needed her. It wasn't attraction, it was muscle memory. This cycle repeats until you recognize what's really being mourned. The breakup, isn't just the end of a relationship, the end of a role that made you feel indispensable. And when your worth depends on being indispensable, you'll never allow yourself to simply be. You'll always need a crisis to exist. The psychological crash comes from that internal collision between exhaustion and emptiness. You're tired of carrying others, but terrified to put the weight down. You want to rest, but rest feels like disappearing. That's why, even after a painful breakup, caretakers often feel an irrational urge to check on their ex. Not because they want reconciliation, but because they want to prove they still matter. They might tell themselves, "I just want to make sure they're okay." But beneath that is the real truth. If they're not okay, then I still have a role. That's the emotional paradox. You want closure, but closure means redundancy. Closure means you're no longer needed. And for someone whose identity is built around caretaking, redundancy feels like death. To the caretaker, love isn't calm. Love is crisis management. Calm feels like absence, and absence feels like abandonment. So even when the relationship was painful, it at least provided a rhythm or purpose. When that disappears, you don't know how to exist in stillness. You start inventing ways to feel necessary again. You might text your ex to check in, or start a new relationship with someone who seems fragile. Anything to avoid facing the reality that your worth shouldn't depend on how well you manage other people's emotions. The real agony of the post-breakup crash is this: you were never in love with balance. You were in love with usefulness. That's what kept you hooked. You were drawn to brokenness because fixing it made you feel alive. But once the crisis ends, your nervous system panics. It tells you something's wrong. Because something is wrong, but because it doesn't recognize peace as safe. That's why you might wake up weeks after the breakup and feel waves of panic, even when everything around you is fine. The silence feels unbearable because, for the first time, there's no emotional chaos to organize your day around. There's just you on. You've never learned how to exist without a problem to solve. The path forward begins when you understand that the terror you re-feeling ISNT about the person at S, about the loss of your identity as the fixer, you're not grieving love. You're grieving the illusion of control. The breakup took away your favorite coping mechanism being needed. Now, you're left with the task of learning to be valuable, without performing, without rescuing, without controlling. And yes, that's terrifying, because it means facing the question you've avoided your whole life. If I am not fixing, who am I? But that question is the beginning of freedom. The silence you're afraid of isn't punishment tit space. Space to exist without a role, without a job, without a mask. Space to learn that you can still matter even when no one needs saving. If this breakdown of the caretaker's crash helped you see your own patterns, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to The Fictionist, where we expose the hidden psychology behind the stories we tell ourselves about love, loss, and identity. The end of a relationship built around caretaking doesn't just create sadness, it creates a vacuum. Not a poetic one, but a literal, biological, and psychological emptiness that the mind can't tolerate. When your daily energy was spent tracking another person's moods, calming storms, and anticipating emotional emergencies, you lived in a constant state of heightened alertness. Your nervous system was wired for crisis, and every small moment of peace was just the calm before the next collapse. Then suddenly it ends. There's no one to fix, no one to worry about, no texts to decode at 2 a.m., no tension to ease. What's left is silence, and that silence becomes unbearable because it holds all the energy you know where to put. That's the vacuum of unspent emotional energy. It's not romantic kit's neurological. Your body doesn't understand that the relationship is over. It still expects to wake up and perform the old rituals, to check in, to monitor, to soothe. That energy doesn't just disappear when love ends. It turns inward, and when it has nowhere to go, it begins to devour you from the inside. The caretaker's brain, conditioned for constant vigilance, doesn't recognize rest as safety, it recognizes it as threat. Stillness feels like failure. The absence of a problem feels like a problem. You start to feel restless, agitated, and anxious for no clear reason. You tell yourself it's loneliness, but it's not. It's withdrawal. It's the crash after the emotional adrenaline of caretaking. The body has been trained to run on emergency mode, and when the emergency disappears, the system collapses. The energy that once kept you alert to someone else, pain now floods back into your own internal space, and that where the real terror begins. Because in that quiet, your own unmet needs surface. The very feelings you avoided by focusing on someone else, your shame, your sadness, your emptiness rise to the surface, and you have no defense against them. This is why people who are chronic caretakers often relapse into the same patterns soon after a breakup. The urge to check on the ex isn't about love, it's about escape. You're not trying to reconnect, you're trying to find somewhere to put that energy again. Because if you can care for them, worry about them, or even argue with them, you don't have to face yourself. You don't have to look at the wreckage of your own emotional neglect. The familiar chaos of helping feels easier than the unknown chaos of healing. Take a real example. Imagine someone named Michael for years. His relationship revolved around managing his partner's anxiety. He'd skip his own plans to stay home when she panicked. He learned to sense her moods before she spoke. His entire life revolved around predicting her next emotional storm. When she finally ended it, he told himself he'd move on. But within days, he was checking her social media, worrying if she was okay, wondering if she was eating, sleeping, coping. It wasn't love, it was the vacuum. His brain didn't know what to do with the energy that used to go toward fixing her. So it created anxiety, because anxiety at least feels purposeful. It gives you something to solve. That's how this emotional economy works. When the mind loses its old investment, it creates a new crisis just to keep the system running. You'll notice it when you start to obsess over things that never used to matter. The house suddenly feels too quiet. You start catastrophizing about the future. You might throw yourself into work, trying to rescue a project instead of a person. It's all the same mechanism, an attempt to redirect the energy of caretaking somewhere, anywhere, that feels familiar. Because, as painful as caretaking was, it gave you something the quiet can't. Direction. In truth, the vacuum isn't empty, it's full. It's full of everything you've ignored while trying to fix others. Every unspoken fear, every unmet need, every piece of grief you postponed is waiting there, asking to be felt. But you've spent years training your brain to turn outward, to fix instead of feel. So when the spotlight turns inward, it feels like an invasion. Your own emotions feel foreign, too intense, too unsafe. That's why depression often follows these breakups, not as a chemical failure, but as a system shutdown. The mind is overwhelmed by input it doesn't know how to process. This is the hidden consequence of emotional overfunctioning. When your worth comes from being needed, your entire nervous system is calibrated around other people's distress. You get dopamine from helping. You get identity from solving. When that disappears, the dopamine crashes, and the withdrawal looks like despair. You might even convince yourself that you need closure or just one more talk with your ex, but what you really craving is a fix. You want to turn the energy outward again, because that's where it's always felt safe. That's why, in the weeks after a breakup, caretakers often find themselves fantasizing about reconciliation, because they believe things will change. But because they can't tolerate the void, it's not about love, it's about regulation. The relationship, no matter how toxic, kept their nervous system busy. Without it, they have to face the deeper truth that they never learned to care for themselves with the same urgency they applied to others. The vacuum of unspent energy is a mirror. It shows you exactly how much of your emotional life has been outsourced. It shows you the cost of defining yourself through usefulness. And it's painful because when that usefulness disappears, you're reforced to meet the self you've been avoiding, the one who doesn't know what to do with quiet, who mistakes rest for emptiness, who has never been nurtured except through service. That's why this phase of the breakup feels both unbearable and addictive. The same nervous system that once thrived on caretaking now starts to create internal crises to fill the space. You might start overthinking every detail of the breakup, replaying every argument, analyzing what you could have done better. It's the same pattern fixing, but now directed at the past. Because fixing the past feels easier than sitting still in the present. The brain isn't trying to torture you, it's trying to restore the old rhythm. And this is where the real work begins, not the emotional performance of caretaking, but the slow, frightening work of reclaiming your own energy. To sit in that vacuum without filling it, to let the silence exist without interpreting it as danger. To let the energy that used to go outward finally start flowing inward to yourself. That's the part most people run from, because it feels unnatural at first. It feels selfish. But that's the lie you've been trained to believe, that your worth is measured by your usefulness. If you can resist the urge to rush back into caretaking, you'll start to notice something subtle. That anxious, restless energy begins to soften. The panic that used to demand action starts to fade. Beneath it, you'll find the emotions you've ignored for years, the sadness, the exhaustion, the need for peace. They were never gone. They were just buried under the constant noise of helping others. The vacuum, as unbearable as it feels, is actually the space where you meet yourself for the first time without the mask of being needed. So when your mind starts begging you to text your ex to fix something, to fill the silence pause, recognize it for what it is, the old survival pattern trying to resurrect itself. You don't owe your energy to anyone right now. The chaos has ended, but you're still vibrating with the memory of it. Let that energy dissolve instead of redirecting it, because only when you stop managing everyone else's emotions will you have the strength to finally face your own. If this helped you see your own post-breakup crash from a new angle, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to The Fictionist, where we decode the hidden emotional logic behind the stories your mind tells when love ends.